you, Danielle. Next, we will have Sheryl Hendriks. Dr. Sheryl Hendriks is a professor of agricultural economics and also the director of Institute for Food, Nutrition and Well-being at the University of Pretoria. And she has been working with us not only on this project, but even before that, connecting us to the on-the-ground happening at the continental level in terms of policy and also the countries in Africa. Thank you, Sheryl.
Thank you, Suresh. Good afternoon. So Danielle's taken us through one loop with the input subsidy program, and I'm going to do the same with our study we worked on micronutrients. And the wider team that we've worked with is quite passionate about this because it's big on the agenda. So there's a lot of focus on nutrition, and I'm sure I don't need to explain why nutrition is important for economic growth and for productivity. But worldwide, there's a lot of focus on three major nutrients, on vitamin A, on iodine, and on iron. But the rollout of these has been quite different in different countries, and the traction has not been there. So we're really far behind on delivering on what is needed for improving the nutrition of people. So this case study focused on three countries, Malawi, South Africa, and Zambia, which were chosen partly because of their proximity and that the private sector operates. There's a commonality in the private sector across those three, but they have quite different context and quite different processes in terms of delivery. So as I've mentioned, we see different traction in different areas. Iodine fortification, we've known about iodine and the benefits of salt iodization since the 1920s, and there's been a lot of evidence around from the 1940s of the fact that we need to do something about it. But you will see that it's only from the 1990s that we start seeing salt iodization happening in these three countries. The same with vitamin A deficiencies. It was only post the 1990s, after the World Summit on Children, which happened in 1990, that started to bring these nutrition and children's nutrition in particular to the fore. And so we find, though, that with vitamin A, there's some quite divergent views on what we should be fortifying. And I'll go through that as we go through the Kaleidoscope model. But when it comes to iron, this is also one that we know exactly what to do with. There's an off-the-shelf solution, so you can provide supplements to people through providing tablets, particularly with pregnant women, iron and folate combinations. Or you can fortify cereals. So typically it's maize and wheat that are fortified. And this is happening, but the Global Nutrition Report from 2016 says that if we continue on the progress that we have so far followed with iron, we will only meet the global target 100 years later than we are meant to. So the progress is excessively slow when it comes to iron. So what do we do about that? So there are various vehicles for dealing with nutrition. As I've mentioned, there's supplementation through taking tablets. There's fortification by adding single or multiple vitamins to your food products. And more recently, biofortification has come onto the agenda. So all of these components have had quite controversial debates, and in fact the scientists are divided as to which is the best system, and the continually revised guidelines that come from World Health Organization, you see the impact of those on the country programs. So if we go through the stages of the Kaleidoscope model, we find that, yes, this is a relevant problem in all countries. So international evidence shows it, and local evidence shows that there's an existence in each country for all three of the micronutrients that we looked at. I mentioned the international focusing events, and this is one component in nutrition where particularly recently global coalitions have created quite a lot of traction in terms of nutrition. So starting with the World Summit on Children in 1990, And that led to the development of national nutrition plans. And all three of these countries were signatories of that summit and developed their national plans, which then informed the rolling out of these multivitamin strategies in each country. So there were off-the-shelf solutions. There are clear binding targets that are written into these agreements, and there is also quite a strong focus on rights. Interestingly enough, not much on children's rights, but on the right to food has come through. It was also very much supported by powerful advocates and coalitions, particularly driven by international agencies, both NGOs and the donors, and the UN system. When we come to the design phase, this international best practice helped move countries quite quickly through the design phase because there was ready advice and assistance to do this. So there was a lot of technical support at the country level in all three of these countries. Even South Africa, which is not a typical donor recipient country, had support on the ground. So training of people, equipment suppliers, and quite a lot of advocacy. So there are very few incidences of ideas, ideologies, and beliefs that come into play in the design phase, but we'll see those play out a little bit later when we come to implementation. The cost-benefit side was really about the decisions as to which food should be fortified. Malawi and Zambia are quite different to South Africa, where you don't have national distribution, and there's many small hammer mills and community and home-based milling of grains. So in South Africa, you see a much more national distribution system that makes fortifying foods and distributing them quite simple. But in Malawi and Zambia, those were very big considerations in the cost-benefit analysis. The cost of supplementation is very low, so it's a couple of cents. In fact, with iodine, it's estimated to be 1 to 2 US cents per year per child. So it shouldn't really be a constraining factor, but in fortification, it plays a much bigger role. So in terms of adoption, these powerful opponents that were in the system were really the private companies in fortification who had numerous excuses for not wanting to engage in this, mostly around cost benefit and competition. The implementing veto players in supplementation and fortification are different. In supplementation, it's mostly your health system, and in fortification, it is the private sector and the distribution components. We've dealt with the propitious timing component in South Africa. This was an opportunity for people to make a major shift post-transition to democracy. I've mentioned about the budgets, and the issue really comes in implementation, especially monitoring the content of fortified foods and the consistent delivery of these. In terms of the supplementation programs, it's often dependent on the departments of health and how much money they have, because supplementation piggybacks on the health delivery system. The institutional capacity plays a major role, both in distribution and coverage of supplementation, but also in the monitoring of fortification. So, for example, porous budgets, repackaging of food products, or especially food products not intended for sale to the consumer. The implementing veto players are there because of the need to be able to coordinate multiple players. So in the health sector and also in the private distribution system. So, but what we didn't see was the commitment of policy champions continuing through the process. So they didn't seem to focus in this component at all. Evaluation and reform is a very important component where we see a lot of changing information coming out. So readjustment of the requirements for supplementation, what is a safe limit for people to consume, and this changes quite a bit. So the changing material conditions and the institutional shifts didn't really feature in this component. So you can see we have work to do. Except for iodine, we're not seeing the kind of traction and improvement that's needed. And so a lot more is needed, particularly in the implementation stage, to make sure there's enough coverage and that there's consistent delivery of this. And so some of the common drivers we saw in the 3 countries was this global knowledge base, the call for action from international agencies. There was strong national leadership, but champions were very important, both international and domestic. And the differences are really in terms of the level of engagement of different stakeholders, the design component, as well as then the regulatory infrastructure for making sure that this actually happens. One of the threats comes with the sustainable component, especially around supplementation when it's funded externally through donor funding. Thank you very much.